And welcome everybody to another edition of the Most Important Conversations. I'm so excited to have Trevor Millar with us today. Trevor, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thrilled to be here, Chad. Thank you.
So Trevor, one of the things that I wanted to start off with today in terms of kind of our conversation is getting a little bit of your background in terms of how you got into the space that you're in around plant medicine, psychedelics, psychedelic therapies, and treatments for people suffering from PTSD to addiction to all of these kinds of things. Just tell us a little bit about your journey and how you kind of got to this point, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Cool. Well, I'll go way back with full disclosure. I had early experiences with psychedelics that were really positive. I first tried LSD when I was 14 years old. It was just available. It's just, I grew up in the Reagan era, just say no to drugs. And I thought for sure I was going to say no to drugs my whole life. Now I say maybe to drugs. But I tried LSD and I knew nothing about the therapeutic potential of the said substance. But I remember walking with my buddies one time when we were all on it. And I just said, this is what adults have forgotten that has made the world so screwed up. So therapeutic intuition was coming through. Fast forward to, I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario, near Toronto, moved out west to Whistler in 96, moved to Vancouver shortly after that. And it's not like I had a few times where I did psychedelics. It's not like I was doing them all the time. But then in Vancouver, I ran into a shop called the Urban Shaman, which sold legal entheogenic substances on a commercial drive in Vancouver. And there was a really neat community around that shop while it was operating. And that's where I first heard of Iboga and Ibogaine. And then on a parallel track at this point, it was really after 9/11 was the catalyst. I was probably 23 years old, just really distraught with the state of the world after 9/11, and started for various reasons to see what I could do to start giving back. And, I actually realized the media had turned me and everybody else into a passive yet obsessive observer of all things. So this was the internet, but I would read 3 newspapers every day. I would get super pissed off at the state of the world. I would, look at different ways, I don't know, just to shake my fist in disgust. And thankfully, it dawned upon me that was not a healthy way to live. So on one hand, I got rid of all media. I went on a complete media fast for about 3 years. And at the same time, I said, okay, well, what can I do to try and make the world a better place then? Put your money where your mouth is kind of thing. So I was new to Vancouver at the time, and Vancouver has the downtown east side neighborhood, the poorest postal code in Canada, abject poverty, high rate of drug use. And I just always had a fascination with that neighborhood from kind of the first time I heard about it to the first time I saw it. And thought I would just do what I can to see if there's anything I could do to help that neighborhood. I knew I had really no qualifications, but I thought maybe that was a benefit. Maybe that would enable me to find a unique way to help. So it turns out over many years it did, but I just started going down to the downtown east side, started looking at different ways that I might be able to help out down there, did some volunteering, built a bit of a network, and essentially it turned into about a 10-year networking and research project. And then in 2009, through a conversation with a woman who's a bit of a legend on the downtown east side as a social activist, I was just talking to her, looking at different ways I might be able to help. We couldn't really think of too many things in that conversation, but the whole time I was speaking to her, there was a binder on the wall behind her that said Ibogaine on it. And in the last few minutes of that conversation, I said, what about Ibogaine? And she said, actually, I have people calling me for that all the time. There was an Ibogaine provider on the Sunshine Coast and it had shut down, but their website was still up. And her number was on the website as somebody you should call if you were looking for a bit of information. So she basically had, what essentially was a sales funnel, people calling all the time looking for Ibogaine. So I said, well, let me follow that thread. And she would essentially forward me all those phone calls from then on. And I did treat a couple people right away, and I saw pretty quickly that I didn't know what I was doing. So thankfully, nobody got hurt through that process. And then in 2012, I got a call from that same woman, and she said, did you know there was an Ibogaine providers conference in town, or there is a providers conference in town? I did not. She said, well, I put your name on the list as a provider. You should go down. So I went down to the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance conference. When I went in there, the first person I met was the guy running the conference, Jonathan Dickinson, who is my business partner in this current venture, actually, but that's where we met. And at that conference, I met a former business partner now, a guy who knew what he was doing with Ibogaine, was really keen to work with it. And I had this kind of sales funnel still. I said, we said, let's see what we can do to help people out. So we treated 3 people together to start. It was 2 brothers and one of the brothers' girlfriends, all addicted to heroin. The treatments went really well. We looked at each other, said there's obviously a need for this in the Vancouver region. Let's set up a business. So we set up my first business, Liberty Root Therapy Ltd. And so we formed that in 2012, and it operated until 2017. We treated about 200 people in that time, mostly for opioid use disorder. We did treat some pro bono patients from the downtown east side as well, with a lot of support on the front and back end. And I was able to legally do all of that. So Ibogaine was listed as a natural health product in Canada. And that gave me this unique window of opportunity to work with Ibogaine. A natural health product shouldn't be potentially dangerous. So Health Canada eventually realized their mistake. And thankfully, they didn't make it illegal. What they did instead is they put it on the prescription drug list. So it was put on the prescription drug list, but because it hasn't gone through phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials, it's still not available as a prescription. So it's still in this no-go zone. So essentially, I haven't been able to legally work with Ibogaine in Canada since then. Maybe I'll just take 2 steps back and tell people what Ibogaine is. It's kind of the dark horse of the plant medicine world because it is potentially dangerous, and because it puts people on a very long trip. It's kind of a 24 to 36 hour long journey. It comes from the Iboga plant. The Iboga plant has been used ceremonially for centuries in West Africa, countries like Gabon. The Bwiti tradition has grown up around the use of that plant medicine. And Ibogaine is one active alkaloid in that plant. And in 1962, somebody who was addicted to heroin, a man by the name of Howard Lotzoff, he was in New York City. His chemist buddy said, you should try this Ibogaine stuff that I've had sitting in my freezer for a little while. He said, sure. He tried it, didn't know what he was getting into, went on this incredibly powerful journey, came out of it, said, whoa, I'm not going to do that again. But then it dawned on him, wait a second, I haven't wanted heroin the whole time I've been on this, nor do I want it now. So that's when its anti-addictive properties were discovered. And Howard then became a champion for trying to get the word out on what he discovered was essentially quote unquote cure for heroin addiction. So in looking at the downtown east side, where there's a high rate of heroin addiction, it all of a sudden kind of made sense to put 2 and 2 together, that we should see what we could do to help people in Vancouver with Ibogaine. So 2017, Health Canada changed the regulatory status of it. So haven't been able to legally work with it in Canada since. Have applied through the Special Access Drug Program a couple of times, but it doesn't even have enough studies behind it yet. Although I think we're close to get permission through that Special Access Drug Program. So through that work, I was asked to be on the board of directors of MAPS Canada. MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies in Canada. There is a small little Canadian branch. I served as chair of the board for about 3 years. And through that, I was introduced through Rick Doblin, who started MAPS, which is in the US. He started the US MAPS, which has taken MDMA through the clinical trial process. So MDMA should be a prescription for PTSD within a couple of years, kind of thing, because of his work. But he called me one day and he said, I have this lovely couple in my living room, Amber and Marcus Capone. They have started a nonprofit called Vets Incorporated, which is sending U.S. Special Forces veterans for Ibogaine treatments. And I figured you guys should know each other. So from that point forward, Amber was really diligent in giving me a call every couple of months kind of thing. It became clear after a while that she was looking for another Ibogaine provider to work with. I just needed to be operating in a country where it was legal to do so. So I started looking for places where I might be able to operate legally, and ended up in Tijuana and have been running this company, Ambia Life Sciences, which is actually a Canadian-based company with a subsidiary in Mexico. And yeah, we've been providing this treatment mostly to still have a house for detoxes, but treat a lot of U.S. Special Forces vets as well. Then I'll just stop there.
Wow. I mean, no, you covered a lot of great things, and that's great. It was succinct because, so let's talk a little bit more about this. There's, from my perspective, we're still just on, and I feel like I've been on this journey exploring the power of psychedelics as a mental health treatment now for at least since 2016, 2017. And I feel like we're still really just on the beginning edges of sort of the masses really understanding the true power of this approach. And whether it's in your case, you're dealing with Iboga or Ibogaine, or whether it's psilocybin or MDMA, or even LSD. I mean, there's just so much out there in terms of positive things that we're seeing in the news media right now about how it can help everything from depression, potentially, there's exploration in terms of its possible impact for things like dementia and other neurological diseases. And now you're talking about PTSD. I mean, what's your view? My view is we are, while this plant medicine interest is coming up, we are simultaneously, as a society, I believe, approaching a mental health crisis, the likes of which I don't think we're prepared for, quite frankly. And there's many reasons why I think that could be the case. But, what are your thoughts on that before we dig in a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I think that pandemic, or I think more than the pandemic, the way the pandemic was handled has really messed with people. And I think that combined with social media, combined with the fact that, people just aren't getting out and learning the social skills and the interpersonal skills that kind of our generation may have been the last generation to get out and play outside without helicopter parents. So yeah, I 100% see that we are coming up against a mental health crisis. Like you look at SSRIs and other psych meds. I think the number is around 1/3 of Americans are on medications like that, which aren't serving anyone. They aren't, part of my job is getting people off of that crap because it doesn't help. I think their own data is showing it's not helping anymore. The placebo effect is getting weaker, I think, or that one of those, the placebo effect's getting stronger and the medication's getting weaker. I don't know. But yeah, I think at the same time, thankfully, there is this psychedelic renaissance that's being called that is incredibly impactful. Like just I live in the realm of what Western science might call a miracle, just because, even to go back to heroin addiction, I can use Ibogaine to get somebody off of heroin virtually overnight. And Western medical science doesn't acknowledge that yet, really. we're coming close. The state of Kentucky has a big initiative trying to get Ibogaine as part of its coping mechanism for the opioid crisis there. But yeah, especially working with these veterans, just to see what 20 years of deploying, 20 years of war. We're in the first time in history where somebody could enlist in the military and then be at war for their entire career. We've never seen what this does to human beings before, and it's not great, especially when there's pretty much zero support once they're retired. Like, it's, you know, you're retired, go out there, you know, you're used to, you know, being go fighting. You're rewarded for your anger, rewarded for your aggression, and then all of a sudden that just stops, and here's your newborn kind of thing. And it's just not computing. These guys are not getting any support from the VA. The only support they get from Veteran Affairs in Canada and the US is here to take these psych meds that don't work at all and have suicide labels on them. To me, that's a non-starter. If you have to put out a product, the warning, you might have increased odds of wanting to commit suicide, even though you're already depressed. Like, that's just a non-starter, but it's not a non-starter. It's an actual label on most of these medications. Yeah. It's a really dismal situation, and thankfully these tools are available. Like, it's interesting. The you know, PTSD, a lot of these guys do feel as though they have post-traumatic stress disorder in some way, shape, or form. They're triggered like that. Their nervous system runs like that. Some of the guys don't feel that. They feel as though they love their job. They were really good at their job. They missed their job. They missed the brotherhood of it all. And but yet something is not right. And what we're uncovering is it's actually traumatic brain injury. It's traumatic brain injury from years of firing 50 caliber weapons, years of being a breacher next to explosives as you're entering buildings, things like that. So the amazing thing is we've discovered through this nonprofit vets, I think they were the first. Amber was kind of the first to, I don't know if she had the intuition that it might be something like traumatic brain injury, but she was able to convince Stanford University through Dr. Nolan Williams to do a study on 30 of the guys that we treated through our facility. So 30 special operators. They needed to be special forces veterans with traumatic brain injury in order to get into the study. And they all went to Stanford prior to coming down here. At Stanford, they did brain scans, a battery of other tests. Then they came down here for Ibogaine. Then they went immediately back to Stanford afterwards for more brain scans, more tests. And then there was a month follow-up. And the pre-brain scans are showing signs of traumatic brain injury. The post-brain scans are showing that a lot of that has largely been reversed or healed. And Stanford won't go so far as to say that, but I'll say it. And what they will go so far as to say, and this study will be published maybe by the time this podcast comes out, but within the next couple of months, it looks as though it's been accepted into the journal Nature Medicine, so one of the major medical journals. And they ran those brain scans through an AI algorithm that indicated, on average, through those 30 guys, the brain actually got 1.37 years younger through taking Ibogaine. And Nolan Williams, who's a neurologist and psychiatrist, you know, there is nothing known in neurology that actually increases the volume of gray matter or white matter in the brain. And they're seeing that after an Ibogaine treatment as well on these guys.
You know what's interesting about that? So a lot of the reading that I've been doing about psychedelics generally, not just Ibogaine. And I don't know very much about Ibogaine, so I'm happy that you're sharing that with us today. A lot of what I've read has been about psilocybin, LSD, you know, some of the more traditional, call them the classic psychedelics, you know, when we think of psychedelics, is that there's an experience that has been researched where when you take psychedelics, in some ways it's related to or similar to the kind of experience, not maybe in the acute moment that you're on it, but in terms of the impact on the brain, that meditation has. And, meditation has been shown to, increase the level of gray matter as well. Now, of course, over many, many years. So what we're talking about here is over a very short period of time, which is quite remarkable. And so, but that there's something for us to look at there, where that brain health, whether it's through things like meditation, and you're aware that the mindfulness movement has become like a huge thing over the last, decade. But unfortunately, like so many things, become so commodified and oversimplified in many respects. But there's this whole aspect of the work that you're doing, which, we're talking about mental health. You're talking specifically about PTSD. But just think about what you just said, the fact that the brain can actually get younger by doing this, and what is the impact on society that could have?
Yeah, it's amazing. The doctor called it, he just presented this data at the MAPS conference, the biggest psychedelic conference ever. Just happened in June of 2023. I think there ended up being 13,000 people at this conference, and he kind of shared the data for the first time, and he called it the Benjamin buttoning of the brain. Actually growing younger. But yeah, like to touch on meditation, like that's really, it's one thing to do something like this, to have this kind of experience, and yes, hopefully it's helpful, but how do you make it last?
That's right.
That's definitely the kind of thing that we encourage everybody to get into is, what's your meditation practice look like? Don't have one? Okay, great. You should probably have one. Can't find 2 minutes to meditate? Well, you should probably try and find 2 hours to meditate then.
Yeah.
So, we do a lot. Everybody we work with gets coaching before and after. So a lot of that is included. What are you going to do to really take advantage and integrate all of this? So we do at least 2 coaching sessions before and at least 2 coaching sessions afterwards to try and get some of that mindfulness, exercise, eating right, all of that stuff incorporated into a person's life as well, because that's really what's going to show the long-term benefits, I think.
Yeah. So there's an individual that, actually, I'll talk to you offline after the podcast a bit about this as well, but there's an individual that's working with our organization, the Most Important Conversations, and he's working with thousands of military veterans around, supporting different things, whether it's lifestyle or their health or whatever the case is. And I think about the fact that, we're talking about veterans right now, but then you start to think about all of the other pockets of society. For example, we're going to have one of the podcasts guests that we're interviewing is someone who's been on the very, very cutting edge of machine learning and AI, working with organizations like Google and others. And he and I were having a conversation recently, and just kind of speculating based on what's kind of going on right now in the ether of the advances in AI and what that means for society and where we're headed as a society. And while there's a lot of great things that I think AI is going to be able to crack open for us in terms of expanding our reach as human beings and the impact that we can have in various areas of life, there's also some concern. And some of the conversation that we had around AI was the impact that it's going to have on the economy. And specifically the possibility, depending on who you believe, but there's an estimation that, by 2030, we could see anywhere from 20 to 40%. I don't know if it'd be 20 to 40% unemployment, or if it would be 20 to 40% of current jobs won't be needed anymore. And meaning they'll be needed, but humans won't do it. AI will do it, or robots will do it. And we started to look at that from the perspective of mental health. And we thought, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for our society, where people have basically been conditioned, we've all been conditioned, by our environment to basically get up, get a career, go to that job every day. We form an identity around that. And can you imagine 20 to 40% of our population no longer having their identity validated every day? And what is the impact of that on the human being, on the brain health, on consciousness, on, all of this kind of stuff? And so I was talking to this other gentleman I was mentioning who's working with the veterans. And, some of the things that were coming up in that conversation is, there's some veterans who have such bad PTSD, and these are veterans who've gone to war, but now imagine people who lose their jobs and lose their ability to make a livelihood and the ripple effect that that can have. I mean, we're going to need more mental health solutions and places to go than ever before. I'm convinced of that, to help people transition through change, because that's not something the brain does very easily, right? Is transition through change. And that's what you're talking about with PTSD, is dramatic, instantaneous change. I mean, people have been in war zones and then suddenly they're sitting in their living room, and they haven't been there maybe for years in many cases. And they're still having recollections of bombs going off and the fight or flight. The adrenal glands haven't learned how to shut off because they've always had to be on. And so in speaking to this other gentleman, I mean, he's also dealing with veterans. But I guess my thinking on all of this is, you're dealing with Ibogaine. How do we start to expand the dialogue around the fact that it's not just war veterans that we have to start thinking about? Like you were saying, the pharmaceutical industry is prescribing things that make people want to commit suicide, So, I mean, we're obviously, we realize we're headed in the wrong direction and we're trying to turn the ship, and the work that you're doing is trying to turn the ship. But I mean, there's a lot of people who don't trust psychedelics. There's a lot of people who grew up in the Reagan era, like you mentioned, and say no to drugs. What are some ways that you're finding in your work that you're able to start changing the conversation and the belief structure around the power of this plant medicine?
Yeah, I think, for one, what you're talking about with AI and kind of if a whole bunch of people are all of a sudden unemployed and can't find that meaning, I think that's one of the really good things that psychedelics are good for, is those times of transition, whether it's from puberty to adulthood, as you would get initiated in the jungles of Africa if you were a part of a Bwiti community, or whether it's a soldier moving from being a soldier to a civilian, or whether it's, a professional athlete who we've worked with moving from being a professional athlete to not anymore. So I think, for one, these are really effective aspects of a solution in that regard. And then how do you change the tone? Well, for one, I've been doing this since, been professionally involved in the world of psychedelics since 2012. And I can't believe how much the conversation has changed in that, 10, 11 years. It was very obscure what I was doing. My mom's a Western trained nurse practitioner. And when I first told her I set up a house in White Rock, BC, giving psychedelics to people, there was a knee-jerk reaction there. Mm-hmm. But then one of the things that really helped change her mind, and I think it's the same thing that helps change most minds, or a lot of minds, especially the more conservative minds, is the data. I got co-published in a medical journal, and then another one, and then another one with incredible results. Actually, just last week, in Frontiers in Pain Management, we had another article posted, and this Stanford study's coming out, and there's so much research being done around the world on all these different psychedelics. So I think that really helps. I think the other neat thing that I have the privilege of being involved in is I'm not treating hippies.
Yeah.
The hippies have been sold on this. You don't need to convince the Grateful Dead fans that
Right.
That psychedelics have purpose and meaning and are useful. I'm working with very conservative soldiers,
Mm.
and very conservative um, politicians. I'm a friend of former Texas Governor Rick Perry, who is a staunch conservative and very proudly so. But when his friend Marcus Luttrell, Marcus is the lone survivor. Mark Wahlberg played him in the movie The Lone Survivor. He was the sole survivor of that incredible Operation Red Wings.
Yeah.
You know, Marcus Luttrell showed up at the governor's house. It's a funny story, actually. Marcus and the governor met in on Coronado Island at the Navy base there. Marcus toured him around, and the governor said, "Well, you're from Texas too. If you're ever in Austin near the governor's mansion, say hello," which I guess he says to lots of people, but Marcus was the only one who actually showed up one day and basically moved in for a couple of years to try and deal with his PTSD.
Wow.
And then Marcus eventually came down and took Ibogaine. And the governor saw the transformation virtually overnight in Marcus. And he was sold. He was all the way on board. So now he is a huge proponent. And that's just how happening more and more. And I think ironically, there's more kind of political action on the conservative side now to try and make these substances available to veterans in particular, but anybody suffering with these kind of ailments. So I think the tune is changing. It's tuned a lot. The tune has changed a lot since I've been involved, and I think it's just happening more and more. So I think podcasts like this, like just more and more of these conversations, because the data is undeniable. The personal experiences are undeniable. The rate of success is so incredibly high that you just can't turn away from it. You've got to take a look at it. If you're rational at all, we probably won't catch everybody, but we don't need everybody.
No.
We just need a key few players, and I think we're getting those.
Yeah. Well, if we take, Thomas Schilling's work at face value, we need about 13% of the population to get on board, and then we'll hit that infamous tipping point, right?
That's
exactly.
Cool. Yes.
Just a thought on that. It's good to hear that this is not like so many things in society. Like, why do things always get politicized? Why you talk about being rational, and if we're just rational at all, we just look at the data. We, as humans, we tend to entrap ourselves in what we're right about, and what we believe we're right about as an ideology. And, we're really interested in building bridges. I don't really care if someone's liberal or conservative. I'm interested in what's going to make humanity thrive, and that's kind of the perspective we need to take. So I'm glad to hear that, because it shouldn't matter if you're a conservative or you're a liberal. This just works.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really too bad how divisive, our culture has become on everything. I think so many of our institutions are captured. I think the mainstream media is completely captured and 100% all the time trying to divide us. So this nonprofit that we work with, Vets Incorporated, the website is vetsolutions.org, but they have an annual gala this year, November 11th, which is Memorial Day, Veterans Day, Remembrance Day, depending on where you're from. They do a big gala every year in San Diego. And last year, the theme color and the theme overall, the theme color was purple. It's what happens when you take the
blue and red,
blue and you mix them, you get purple. So we had Rick Doblin on stage, the founder of MAPS. He's an affirmed kind of left-leaning human being on stage with Rick Perry.
The two Ricks.
The governor. The two wings. So it takes two wings to fly.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really great field for the potential of bringing people together. Absolutely.
And so let me just back up a little bit. So you're working with Ibogaine. I know you used to work with and have worked with the other psychedelics, the classic ones as well. Is it just because Ibogaine is just so much stronger and potent that it's what's required to help these soldiers dealing with PTSD really kind of crack open literally their mind to a new potential and get them out of the addictive loop that they're in with the trauma and everything?
Yeah. So, a couple of things. I have worked with, I have probably sat for 100 people giving them psilocybin journeys. Uh, Ironically, so I never wanted to be an underground practitioner of anything. So that's when I was able to work with Ibogaine in Canada, saw that potential, just all the right doors opened, and that was very, on one level, very easy for me to make happen. And then when Ibogaine was rescheduled, I did stop working with it because if you work underground with Ibogaine, there's a chance, it is a potentially dangerous substance. So you don't want to hesitate if you need to take somebody to the hospital. So ironically, I switched to a more illegal substance to work with because people were still looking for help. And I gave psilocybin to a bunch of people. So I have worked a bunch with psilocybin. The thing about being down south where I am and Ibogaine is, once again, it's legal. Like I'm not doing any underground. So that's one reason why we're working with Ibogaine. And yeah, it's kind of like pulling out the big guns. Like if you just want to, it's so strong, it can get you off heroin virtually overnight, or it's so strong, it can get a person off of heroin virtually overnight. What can it do for you?
Right.
And it's, I did Marcus Luttrell's podcast, actually, the Team Never Quit podcast. And this guy who fell off a mountain 5 times in Afghanistan through this harrowing adventure says that Ibogaine was the hardest thing he's ever done. And I said, whoa, that's bad for marketing if Marcus Luttrell is saying it's the hardest thing he's ever done. But it's effective. Like it's a challenging journey, but it's incredibly effective. I was on a panel of a psychedelic conference in Toronto, and there was this lovely Ecuadorian shaman type woman who seemed pretty legit on the panel with me. And she was talking about the mushrooms as los niños, as the little children. And she talked about ayahuasca as the grandmother, which is a common term for ayahuasca. And then she talked about cactus like peyote or San Pedro as the grandfather. And I heard Iboga referred to as the grandfather before. So I kind of looked down the aisle at her and said, well, what about Iboga? And she goes, oh, it's the master. It's got some unique qualities, and it really, the ability to help somebody overcome an opioid addiction. None of the other psychedelics come even close to that. It does something it seems as though it's resetting the opioid receptors to an opioid naive state, so people don't have to go through the painful withdrawals of coming off opiates, and they don't crave or desire it too much afterwards. And then this thing that we're discovering with the traumatic brain injury, that's really unique. This Stanford study is going to be a very groundbreaking study. And we don't know of any of the other psychedelics that we've studied that has that kind of power. We've seen, some changes in the brain and different brain activity when we do studies on brains with things like psilocybin. But this neuroregenerative capacity that Ibogaine seems to be showing is very unique so far.
So what's interesting about that, it makes me think of that, the movie that Will Smith did years ago, Concussion, right? Here's one way, here's good marketing, Trevor. Get the NFL behind this.
Yeah.
To help people with all of those concussions, right?
Yeah, I've treated 2 NFL guys. I don't know if they have the ear of the commissioner, but I've treated 2 NFL guys. One of them was long since retired. He was about 65 years old. He saw some positive benefits. One of them a lot younger, more recently retired, saw tremendous benefits. He was really suicidal, and that cleared that up for him. I've treated 3 UFC fighters now as well, so
Wow.
that's the other, trying to get Dana White's ear on all of this, and apparently he is listening. So yeah, we're working towards all that. I really feel as though Ibogaine's really good at getting people from -10 to 0.
Mm.
And all of these substances, they're very good at getting people from -10 to 0. They're also very good at getting people from 0 to +10. So that performance enhancing aspect of it, I think, is going to be really sought after once people start realizing it's that potential. Like, maybe you don't have to retire from the UFC before doing this
Right.
the first time. Maybe you do it one time mid-career and then one time afterwards. And same with the NFL and
Right.
NHL. As being a Canadian, I know there are some hockey players that are really interested in this as well.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting there, because that's, if we talk about culture wars, if we can get this picked up by the culture versus just, the perception of people is that, well, it's not me, it's people who have worse problems than me, so they separate themselves out from it. But when you start to realize that it's it's neuroregenerative, well, that we could all probably use some of that, Let me ask you a question. There's people who have such traumatic PTSD that you can't even get them to agree to go through treatment. Like, they're in a weird kind of loop. I'm speaking specifically, there's someone on our team in our organization who has a family member. This is the problem that they're having with the former war veteran, has such traumatic PTSD that you can't force someone onto this. They have to willingly want to go through the treatment. What do you do in a situation like that, where they're just so terrified of anything and everything, and they won't even do the treatment that'll help them no longer be in a state of fear and paralysis?
Yeah, it's I think it's about dangling the right carrots. I faced this from day one of working with Ibogaine in regards to, we speak to many parents who want to get their kids off of heroin. But if their kid's not ready to get off heroin or fentanyl, then there's really not much you can do. So it's so important that we have full buy-in. We can't take that first step unless that patient takes the first step. So yeah, I think it's not easy. There's a well-known veteran that we're going to be treating here shortly. And yeah, he's been resistant, and finally just reaches a breaking point. I've got to try something.
Yeah.
And I think that's basically all it comes down to, is the energy of caring goes a long way with people in that situation. I found that. So just continue to show that you care. Try and, get the right podcast and the right information in front of that person. And hopefully at one point that door cracks open a little bit where you can slip in with that window of opportunity. But I think it's just dangling all the right carrots, and hopefully they eventually decide to take their healing in their own hands.
Are you seeing any, I'm thinking of Rick Doblin's work with MDMA, and I mean, are you seeing any movement where Ibogaine, say in the United States and Canada, is going to start to crack open up a little bit, so you don't have to only work in Tijuana? Not that it's a bad place to work, because you're getting some great stuff done down there. But what are you seeing there? Where are we at in this, and what can we do to help move it forward?
That's the dream. As I mentioned before, Kentucky, there's a super interesting initiative happening in Kentucky. There's a really incredible human being named Brian Hubbard. He has, so a bunch of states sued Big Pharma for their role in the opioid crisis, and won. So Kentucky has been allocated something like $500 million over the course of the next 18 years to use that money towards fighting the opioid crisis. Brian described himself to me once as a conservative hippie. So he kind of understands the value of these medicines, and he's all in on Ibogaine as the potential solution. So they've already had at least one hearing and one press conference, and they're moving towards another hearing here in a couple of months to continue it. But essentially, they're going to try and create a private-public partnership towards doing clinical trials around Ibogaine within the state of Kentucky, with their end goal being that Ibogaine will be widely available to help fight the opioid crisis there. So that's a really big deal. That's huge that Brian stepped out on that limb to try and I don't know, do the right thing, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
There was a clinical trial for opioid use disorder in Manchester that I heard about that got started. There was a small scale trial in Spain using Ibogaine to help people come slowly off of methadone. And the wheels are in motion towards doing a clinical trial for Ibogaine for the traumatic brain injury indication. But that's basically what it's going to come down to. Is people always ask me, or people always assume that big pharma is really against this, and you better be worried about big pharma coming down hard on you one day. I don't think it's really like that. I think it's more that the system is just rigged against anyone but big pharma taking these drugs through the clinical trial process. Like Rick with MAPS has done this. It's taken him since 1983 or 1986, though. He's been working on it, and he's one of two nonprofits in history to take a drug through the drug development process. So, he thought he might be able to do it with $10 million. He's now up over $100 million on this process. So there's just a lot of forces. I don't think necessarily nefariously working against these substances. It's just the system itself, as we see in so many of these institutions that we're living with. The system itself is rigged against getting these out to people properly.
Yeah.
And I think there's hope. I think there's a team behind trying to take Ibogaine through the clinical trial process for traumatic brain injuries. I think it's got the highest chance of success out of all, and Kentucky's got a very high chance of success as well. But once it's through the clinical trial process, then it'll be available as a prescription. And then there's a whole bunch of different entrepreneurial ways that we'll be able to get these substances into the people that need them.
Yeah. I think what you've said is dead on. It's so the system, the way that we've set it up, is, first of all, like many of our systems in our society right now, they were created at a time with the level of awareness that we had at the time that they were created, and with the intention for why they were created. And it's a classic, we didn't know what we didn't know. But now we're beholden to the system and we're entrenched. And so the challenge is always, how do we reinvent the system? How do we reinvent the vehicle without breaking it down to the point where it no longer functions? We have nothing, but we need to transform it, while we're using it. That's always a challenge. But the systems that we've created on any subject, not just this subject, are proving themselves to no longer be able to handle the level of complexity and the changing dynamics of just how we're living life, how we've constituted ourselves. Even thinking back when a lot of these systems were created after the Second World War, I mean, the population of the Earth was less than half what it is right now at that point in time. So we're dealing with an order of magnitude that these systems were never contemplated to handle. And in the case of big pharma, let's face it, it's a business. So their interest is probably not stopping the research, but wanting to make sure that they're not left on the outside looking in, and that there's some way for them to monetize this and get in on the money-making opportunity. That's really if they can make money, they're fine. So that's really what it is. So what we need to do in an interesting way is find a way to involve big pharma in bringing the solution to market, not trying to, again, I'm all about building bridges, not trying to go to war with them about it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I agree. It's a younger version of me was just like, burn it all down.
Yeah, me
It
too.
doesn't work. And I think that's kind of, I work with psychedelics for a living. I'm very left-leaning human being on many things. And at a certain stage, I'm like, yeah, let's just burn it all down. And I've definitely matured in my views. And it's not like that. Like, the system is working to a certain degree. You don't want to tinker with it too much and have more people hurt than need to be. So yeah, I think it's just going to take some sober kind of step by step moving it forward. And I see that happening in the right places, thankfully. And kudos to Rick and Maps, because they were really trailblazers on this.
So let me turn to your organization and the organization that's behind you. I mean, if someone wants to come forward, they hear this podcast, they want to come forward, they have a family member or a loved one or someone who's dealing with PTSD or addiction, are you only working with war veterans right now? How do they get in touch with you? What does that look like?
We have 3 facilities now. Our website is ambio.life, and there's an apply now button and anybody can click it. But we essentially have 3 houses. One house is dedicated to the detoxes. So Ibogaine's very good at detoxing people from opiates, as we've said. Also very good at helping interrupt most addictions to most street drugs like methamphetamines. Kratom is one that's out there now. It's very opiate-like that people are getting unknowingly addicted to because it's available at every gas station in the United States. Alcohol, it's very good for alcohol use disorder. You do need to detox off alcohol before taking Ibogaine because the detox itself can be dangerous, but we can help facilitate that as well if need be. So we have this one house that can take people in on an individual basis. Those treatments, start around $10,000 and go up depending on how long they're going to need to stay. Then we have 2 other houses that do this 5-day psychospiritual protocol, as we call it, which is the protocol that we're running these veterans through. So, for one, we do tend to put veterans with veterans. They like that brotherhood thing. So one house that is really just is a vet's house. But that protocol is 5 days, as I've said. We'll pick people up in San Diego on, day 1, bring them down. We're only about half an hour from the airport in San Diego. The first day, we do some medical intake. We have incredible chefs that cook for people all week long, have some lunch, do a circle in preparation for the Ibogaine journey. We've been taking people to a traditional Mexican sweat lodge that first day as well, which is a great way to kick off the week. We have an incredible elder who runs that for us. And then day 2, we do things like breath work, massage therapy, another circle in preparation, some one-on-one coaching. We have an on-site therapist that's there. And then on that second night, we start working with Ibogaine. So that will go through that night into the 3rd day, which is largely a day of recovery. And then a couple more days of recovery out the other end. And like, if we pick people up on a Monday, we'll have them back in San Diego on a Friday with, as I mentioned, coaching around that as well. So preparatory coaching and then integration coaching afterwards.
So it's about a 5-day stint.
Yeah, so that's 5 days, and that's currently, if you're a veteran or a first responder, that's $6,350, and if you're a civilian, it's $7,350 to come in. So,
and have you had any that have had such traumatic conditions that they relapse and they have to come back, or what's been the experience with that?
It's more, one of the metaphors I use to describe this work is that I don't think doing psychedelics is like bringing you some missing piece of the puzzle. Like, you do psychedelics and all of a sudden you've got this piece brought to you that you've been missing your whole life and finally you're complete. I don't think it's like that at all. I think it's more like, as we live life, we see life through a filter, almost like a pane of glass. And as we suffer traumas, as we suffer heartache, that glass gets dirty. And it gets so dirty that we don't recognize that it's even dirty anymore. And I think doing substances like this is like cleaning that filter from the inside out.
Mm.
And you're like, oh, wow, life is actually awesome. And you're more attuned to it and have a higher degree of clarity that just makes life a lot more livable. And I think when people come back, it's often, yeah, maybe they didn't feel as though they got their glasses clean as they needed to the first time, or some more stuff happened and they just want that touch up, and they know that this process worked for them. So yeah, do definitely have some repeat customers, and they're kind of happily repeat customers, excited to come back down and spend some more time with us.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, well, we want to be a source of connecting people who are going through these various types of trauma into your organization. So it's ambio.life is the website. And there's a form on there that they can fill out. And what's your capacity? And is there a waiting list? Like, what do people have to expect if we put the bird call out?
We're currently booked about 2 months out.
Okay.
So if you got in touch now, you could probably get in by the mid to end of November kind of thing.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, Trevor, this has been tremendous. I know we'll have you back on again to talk more about this. And I'm excited actually to speak about you, with you rather, offline with some other things that we might be able to do to help out. Big believer in what you've always been doing. We didn't even touch on your work with the dosed film and all of that kind of stuff, which I know is now seems like ancient history, but compared to what you're doing. But we really, really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today and to educate us about the great work that you're doing with people suffering massive PTSD and using psychedelics. You know, nature has provided us what we need if only we are open to seeing that. You know, it's all there.
I think that's definitely something that I've come to realize is we really do have all the answers. Now it's just a matter of willingness to put those answers into play. So hopefully we figure this shit out.
I think, well, with people like you helping, I think I'm optimistic about where we're going. That's for sure. So, well, I appreciate you taking the time, and we will definitely invite you back for a follow-up conversation, especially because we hope to get involved and help to support your work. So
wonderful. Thanks, Chad. Great chatting.
Thanks so much.
That concludes this episode of The Most Important Conversations. This in-depth conversation could set you on the path to self-improvement, which is essential if you want to be an effective leader and take meaningful action in your life. If you enjoyed this episode and want more of these stimulating discussions, you can find them at tmicglobal.com. Remember, the world is at a crossroads right now. You can't afford to waste this opportunity to take charge of your life, build meaningful relationships with others, and co-create a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.